Chapter 15. She was accompanied by a dog of about the size of a young elephant, yellow in colour and with large ears sticking up, with whom I would willingly have fraternized, but after drinking in the delicious scent of my trouser legs for a brief moment, it saw something out in the street, which aroused its interest and left us. Vanessa, meanwhile, had picked up my By Order of the Tsar, and I could see by the way she sniffed that she was about to become critical. There had always been a strong strain of book reviewer blood in her. "Trash," she said. "It really is time you began reading something worthwhile. I don't expect you to start off with Turgenev and Dostoevsky," she said, evidently alluding to a couple of Russian exiles she'd met in London, who did a bit of writing on the side. "But there are plenty of good books which are easier and at the same time educational. I brought one with me," she went on, and I saw that she was holding a slim volume bound in limp purple leather, with some sort of decoration in gold on the cover, and I shuddered strongly. To a man who has seen as much of life as I have, there's always something sinister in a book bound in limp purple leather. "It is a collection of whimsical essays, The Prose Ramblings of a Rhymester, by Reginald Sprocket, a brilliant young poet from whom the critics expect great things. His style has been much praised, but it is the thought in these little gems to which I particularly call your attention. I'll leave them here. I must be off. I only came to bring you the book." You probably think I reel beneath this blow, but actually my heart was not so heavy as it might have been, for my quick brain had perceived how this would do me a bit of good. The revolting object would make an admirable Christmas present for my Aunt Agatha, always a difficult person to find Yuletide gifts for. I was warming myself with this thought when Vanessa continued, "Be very careful not to lose it. It has Reginald's autograph in it." And glancing at the title page, I saw that this was indeed so, which would have bucked Aunt Agatha up no little. But in addition to inscribing the slim volume with his own foul name, the blighter had inscribed Vanessa's. "To Vanessa, the fairest of the fair, from a devoted admirer," he'd written, dishing my plans completely. That was when my heart got heavy again, for though she hadn't definitely said so, something told me that later on I'd be expected to pass an examination on the little opus, and failure would have the worst effects. Having said she must be off, she naturally stayed on for another half hour, much of which time was devoted to pointing out additional defects in my spiritual make-up, which had occurred to her since our last meeting. It just showed how strong the missionary spirit can be in women that she could contemplate the idea of teaming up with a dubious character like PG Wodehouse. Her best friends would have warned her against it. "Cast him into outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth," they would have said. "No good trying to patch him up, he's hopeless." It was my membership of the Drones Club that now formed the basis of her observations. She didn't like the Drones Club, and she made it quite clear that at the conclusion of the honeymoon I would cross its threshold only over her dead body. So, reckoning up the final score, the Bertie Wooster who signed the charge sheet in the vestry after the wedding ceremony would be a non-smoker, a teetotaler, for I knew it would come to that, and an ex-member of the Drones. In other words, a mere shell of his former self. Little wonder that, as I listened to her, I gulped, as Plank's native bearer must have done when they were getting ready to bury him before sundown. The prospect appalled me, and while it was appalling me, Vanessa moved to the door, this time apparently really intending to be off. And she had opened the door, Bertram much too much of a shell of his former self to open it for her, when she started back with a gasping cry. "Father," she cried gaspingly, "he's coming up the garden path." "He's coming up the garden path?" I said. I was at a loss to imagine why Pop Cook should be calling on me. I mean to say we weren't on those terms. "He's stopped to tie his shoelace," she cried, gaspingly as before, and that concluded her share of the dialogue. With no further words, she bounded into the kitchen like a fox, pursued by both the corn and the Pytchley, slamming the door behind her. I could appreciate her emotion. She was aware of her parents' distaste for the last of the Woosters, a distaste so marked that he turned mauve and swallowed his lunch the wrong way at the mention of my name, and Chez Me was the last place he would wish to find her. Orlo Porter had thought the worst on learning of what he called her clandestine visits to the Wooster home, and a father would, of course, think worse than Orlo. Pure though I was as the driven S, a fat chance I had of persuading him that I wasn't a modern Casa something. Not Casabianca, that was the chap who stood on the burning deck. Casanova, I knew I'd get it. And what he would do to Vanessa in his wrath would be plenty. She was, as I have made clear, a proud beauty, but a father of the calibre of Pop Cook can make even a proud beauty wish she'd thought twice before blotting her copybook. He may not be able any longer to whale the tar out of her with his walking stick, as in the good old days, but he can cut off her pocket money and send her to stay with her grandmother at Tunbridge Wells, where she will have to look after 7 cats and attend divine service 3 times on Sunday. Yes, one could understand her being perturbed on seeing him tying up his shoelace outside Wee Nook, which, I forgot to mention earlier, was the name of my GHQ. It had been built, I learned subsequently, for a female cousin of Mrs. Briscoe's, who painted watercolours. And if she was perturbed, I was on the perturbed side too. It was with some trepidation, in fact quite a lot of it, that I awaited my visitor's arrival, a trepidation that was not diminished when I saw that he'd brought his hunting crop with him. I hadn't taken to him much at our previous meeting, and I had the feeling that I wasn't going to get very fond of him now. But I will say this for him, that he didn't waste time. He was a man of quick, decisive speech, who had no use for tedious preliminaries, but came to the point at once. I suppose you have to in order to run a big business successfully. Well, Mr. Wooster, as I understand you are calling yourself now, it may interest you to know that Major Plank, who had lost his memory, recovered it last night, and he told me all about you. It was a nasty knock, and the fact that I'd been expecting it didn't make it any better. Oddly enough, I felt no animosity toward Cook, holding Plank the bloke responsible for this awkward situation. Roaming through Africa knee-deep in poisonous snakes of every description, and with more man-eating pumas around you than you could shake a stick at, he could so easily have passed away, regretted by all, instead of which he survived and went about making life tough for harmless, typical young men about town, who simply wanted to be left alone to restore their delicate health. Cook was continuing, and getting nastier every moment. You are a notorious crook, known to your associates as Alpine Joe, and your latest crime was to try to sell Major Plank a valuable statuette, which you had stolen from Sir Watkin Bassett of Totley Towers. You were arrested by Inspector Witherspoon of Scotland Yard, fortunately before you had accomplished your nefarious ends. I presume from the fact that you are at large that you have served your sentence, and you are now in the pay of Colonel Briscoe, who has employed you to steal my cat. Have you anything to say? Yes, I said. No, you haven't, he said. I can explain everything, I said. No, you can't, he said. And by Jove, I suddenly realized I couldn't. It would have involved a long character analysis of Sir Watkin Bassett, another of my Uncle Tom, a third of Stephanie Stiffy Bing, now Mrs. Stinker-Pinker, a fourth of Jeeves, and would have taken about 2 hours and a quarter, provided he listened attentively and didn't interrupt, which of course he would have done. Matters therefore seemed to be at what you might call a deadlock, and the thought had suggested itself to me that my best plan would be to leave his presence and start running and keep on running till I reached the northern fringe of Scotland, when a noise, like an explosion in a gasworks, broke in on my reverie, and I saw that he was holding the slim volume which Vanessa, the silly ass, had omitted to take off stage with her. "This book!" he yowled. I did my best. "Ah, yes," I said. "Reggie Sprocket's latest. I always keep up with his work, a brilliant young poet of whom the critics expect great things. These, in case you're interested, are whimsical essays. They are superb, not only in the style, but the thought in these little gems." My voice died away. I had been about to urge him to buy a copy, but I saw that he was not in the mood. He was staring at the opening page with its inscription, and I knew that words would be wasted, as the expression is. He gave the hunting crop a twitch. "My daughter has been here." She did look in." "Ha!" I knew what that "ha" meant. It was short for, "I shall now thrash you within an inch of your life." A moment later he used the longer version, as if in doubt as to whether he'd made himself clear. If you were to come to me and say, Wooster, to settle a bet, which would you estimate is to be preferred, having your insides torn out by somebody's bare hands, or being thrashed within an inch of your life? I would find it difficult to decide. Both are things you'd rather have happen to another chap. But I think I would give my vote in favour of the last named, always provided the other fellow was doing it in a small room, for there he would find that he had set himself a testing task. The dimensions of the sitting-room of Wee Nook did not permit of a full swing. Cook had to confine himself to chip shots, which an agile person like myself had little difficulty in eluding. I eluded them, therefore, with no great expenditure of physical effort, but I would be deceiving my public if I said that I was enjoying the episode. It offends one's pride when one has to leap like a lamb in springtime at the bidding of an elderly little gawd-helpers with whom it's impossible to reason. And it was plain that Cook, in his present frame of mind, wouldn't recognise reason if you served it up to him in an individual plate with watercress around it. That, of course, was what prevented me from fulfilling myself in the encounter, the fact that he was an elderly little gawd-helpers. It was the combination of age and size that kept me from giving of my best. I might, indeed I would, have dotted in the eye a small young gawd-helpers or a gawd-helpers of riper years of the large economy size, but I couldn't possibly get tough with an undersized little squirt who would never see 55 again. The chivalry of the Woosters couldn't ever contemplate such an action. I thought once or twice of adopting the policy which had occurred to me at the outset, viz., running up to the north of Scotland. I had often wondered, when I read about fellows getting horsewhipped on the steps of their club, why they didn't just go up the steps and into the club, knowing that the chap behind the horsewhip wasn't a member, and wouldn't have a chance of getting past the hall porter. But the catch was that running up to Scotland would mean turning my back, a fatal move. So we just carried on with our rhythmic dance, till my guardian angel, who until now had just been sitting there, decided, and about time too, to take a hand in the proceedings. As might have been expected in a cottage called Wee Nook, there was a grandfather clock over against the wall, and he now arranged that Cook should bump into this and come a perler. And while he was still on the floor, I acted with the true Wooster resource. I have stated that the previous owner of Wee Nook expressed herself as a rule in watercolours, but on one occasion she had changed her act. Over the mantelpiece there hung a large oil painting depicting a bloke in a three-cornered hat and riding breeches, in conference with a girl in a bonnet and what looked like muslin. And as it caught my eye, I suddenly remembered Gussie Fink Nottle and the portrait at Aunt Dahlia's place in Worcestershire. Gussie, stop me if you've heard this before, while closely pursued by Spade, now Lord Sidcup, who, if memory serves me aright, wanted to break his neck, had taken refuge in my bedroom and was on the point of having his neck broken, when he plucked a picture from the wall and brought it down on Spade's head. The head came through the canvas, and Spade, momentarily bewildered at finding himself wearing a portrait of one of Uncle Tom's ancestors round his neck like an Elizabethan ruff, gave me the opportunity of snatching a sheet from the bed and enveloping him in it, rendering him null and void, as the expression is. I went through a precisely similar routine now, first applying the picture, and then a tablecloth, not having a bedsheet handy, after which I withdrew and went off to the Goose and Grasshopper to see Orlo. Chapter 16. Anybody not in possession of the facts would probably have been appalled at my rashness in placing myself within disemboweling range of Orlo Porter, feeling that I was tempting fate, and in about 2 ticks would be wishing I hadn't. But I, strong in the knowledge that Orlo P had been reduced to the level of a fifth-rate power, was able to approach the coming interview in a bumps-a-daisy spirit which might quite easily have led to my bursting into song. Orlo, as I had predicted, was in the bar having a gin and ginger. He lowered the beaker as I drew near, and regarded me in a squiggle-eyed manner like a fastidious luncher observing a caterpillar in his salad. "Oh, it's you," he said. I conceded this, for he was right. No argument about it. Assured that he wasn't looking squiggle-eyed at the wrong chap, he proceeded, "What do you want?" "A word with you." "So you've come to gloat?" "Certainly not, Porter," I said. "When you hear what I have to say, you will start skipping like the high hills. Not that I've ever seen high hills skip, or low hills for that matter. Porter, what would you say if I told you all your troubles, all the little odds and ends that are bothering you now, would be over ere yonder sun had set?" "It has set." "Oh, has it? I didn't notice." "And it is getting on for dinner time, so if you'll kindly get the hell out of here—" "Not till I have spoken." "Are you going to speak some more?" "Lots more. Let us examine the position you and I are in calmly and in a judicial spirit. Vanessa Cook has told me she will marry me, and you are probably looking on me as a snake in the grass. Well, let me tell you that any resemblance between me and a snake in the grass is purely coincidental. I couldn't issue a nolli prosequi, could I, when she said that? Of course not. But all the while I was right-hoeing, I felt I was behaving like a louse." "You are a louse." "No, that's where you make your error, Porter. I am a man of sensibility, and a man of sensibility does not marry a girl who's in love with somebody else. He gives her up." He choked on his gin and ginger as he suddenly got the gist. "You would give her up to me?" "Absolutely." "But, Wooster, this is noble. I'm sorry I said you were a louse." "Quite all right, sort of mistake anyone might make." "You remind me of Cyrano de Bergerac." "One has one's code." He had been all smiles, or pretty nearly all smiles, up to this point, but now melancholy marked him for her own again. He heaved a sigh as if he'd found a dead mouse at the bottom of his tankard. "It will be useless for you to make this sacrifice, Wooster. Vanessa would never marry me." "Of course she would." "You weren't there when she broke the engagement." "My representative was. At least he was listening at the door." "Then you know the general run of the thing." He gave me a full report. "And you say she still loves me?" "Like a ton of bricks. Love cannot be extinguished by a potty little lover's quarrel." "Potty little lover's quarrel, my left eyeball. She called me a lily-livered poltroon, and a sleek-it, timorous, cowering beastie. One wonders where she picks up such expressions, and all because I refused to go to old Cook and demand my money. I'd been to him once and asked him in the most civil manner to cough up, and she wanted me to go again, and this time to thump the table and generally throw my weight about." "Well, you should, Orlo. That's just what you ought to do. What happened last time?" "He flatly refused." "How flatly?" "Very flatly. And it would be the same if I went again." He had given me the cue I wanted. I had been wondering how best to introduce what I had in mind. I smiled one of my subtle smiles, and he asked me what I was grinning about. "Not if you select your time properly," I said. "What time was it you made your other try?" "About 5 in the afternoon." "As I suspected. No wonder he gave you the bum's rush. 5 in the afternoon is when a man's sunny disposition is down in the lowest brackets. Lunch wore off hours ago, and cocktails are not yet in sight. He isn't in the mood to oblige anyone about anything. Cook may be a hard-boiled egg, but dinner softens the hardest. Approach him when he is full to the brim, and you'll be surprised. Fellas at the Drones have told me that, applying after he is tucked into the evening meal, they have got substantial loans out of Oofy Prosser." "Who is Oofy Prosser?" "The club millionaire, man who by daylight watches his disbursements like a hawk. Cook is probably just the same. Tails up, Porter, get cracking. Be bloody, bold, and resolute," I said, remembering a gag from that play Macbeth, which I was mentioning some while back. He was impressed, as who would not have been. His face lit up as if someone had pressed a button. "Wooster," he said, "you're right. You've shown me the way. You've made my path straight. Thank you, Wooster, old man." "Not at all, Porter, old chap." "It's an extraordinary thing. Anyone looking at you would write you off as a brainless nincompoop with about as much intelligence as a dead rabbit." "Thank you, Porter, old chap." "Not at all, Wooster, old man. Whereas all the time you have this amazing insight into human psychology." "I have hidden depths, would you say?" "You bet you have, Wooster, old horse." And in another jiffy he was pressing a gin and ginger on me, as if we'd been bosom pals for years and the subject of my insides had never come up between us. Returning to Wee Nook some 20 minutes later after what had practically amounted to a love feast, I had that jolly feeling you don't often get nowadays, that God was in his heaven and all right with the world, as the fellow said. I counted my blessings one by one and found the sum total most satisfactory. All was quiet on the Porter front. Billy Graham was even now returning the cat to its little circle at Eggersford Court. Porter and Vanessa Cook would soon be sweethearts again, and if my popularity with Pop Cook was at a low ebb, rendering unlikely any chance of a present from him next Christmas, that was a small flaw in the ointment. Or is it fly? I never can remember. Everything, in short, was just like Mother makes it. And it was a blithe B. Wooster who, hearing the telephone tootle, went to answer it with, as you might say, a song on his lips. It was the aged relative, and the dullest ear could have spotted that she was in something of a doodah. For some moments after we'd established connection, she confined herself to gasps and gurgles, such as might have proceeded from some strong swimmer in his agony. "Hello," I said. "Is something up?" In the course of this narrative I have had occasion to mention several hacking laughs, but for sheer rasp and explosiveness, the one the old ancestor emitted at these words topped the lot. "Something up!" she boomed. "You would say a thing like that when I'm nearly off my rocker. Has that cat been returned to store yet?" "Billy Graham is in full control." "You mean he hasn't started yet?" "Yes, and come back. But unfortunately the cat followed him, so he says. Anyway, he arrived here with it in close attendance, and he's now taken it off again. He's probably decanting the animal at this moment. But why the agitation?" "I'll tell you why the agitation. If that cat is not back where it belongs immediately, if not sooner, ruin stares me in the eyeball, and Tom is in for the worst attack of indigestion he's had since the time he ate all that lobster at his club. And only myself to blame." "Did you say you were to blame?" "Yes. Why?" "I only wondered if I'd heard you correctly." I have become so accustomed to being blamed for everything that goes wrong that her words had touched me deeply. You don't often find an aunt taking the rap when she has a nephew at her disposal to shove the thing onto. It is pretty universally agreed that that is what nephews are for. My voice shook a bit as I applied for further details. "What seems to be the trouble?" I asked. Aunts, as a class, are seldom good listeners. She did not answer the question, but embarked on what sounded as if it was going to be a lecture on conditions in her native land. "I'll tell you what's wrong with the England of today, Bertie. There are too many people around with scruples and high principles and all that sort of guff. You can't do the simplest thing without somebody jumping on the back of your neck because you've offended against his blasted code of ethics. You'd think a man like Jimmy Briscoe would be broad-minded, but no. He couldn't have been more puff-faced if he'd been the Archbishop of Canterbury. You probably put the blame on his brother, the vicar, but I don't agree. I can excuse him because it's his job to be finicky about things. But Jimmy, he made me feel as if I'd shot a fox or something, and it wasn't as if I was getting anything out of it. It was a pure act of kindness, because I could see he had the interests of the organ at heart, and was really worried about it. Damn it, St. Francis of Assisi would have done the same, and everybody would have said what a splendid chap he was, and what a pity there weren't more like him. Whereas the way Jimmy went on..." I could see that if not checked with a firm hand, this would continue for a goodish time. "I'm sorry if I seem slow in the uptake, aged R," I said, "but if so, put it down to the fact that you appear to me to be delirious. Your words are like the crackling of thorns under the pot. As the fellow said, what on earth do you think you're talking about?" "Haven't you been listening?" "I've been listening, yes, but without coming within 1.25 miles of getting the gist." "No, heavens! I might have known I'd have to tell you in words of 1 syllable. Here's what happened in simple language which even you can understand. I happened to be talking to the vicar, and he told me what a weight on his mind the church organ was, it being at its last gasp and no money to pay the vet, because he'd already touched Jimmy for quite a bit to mend the church roof, and if he tried to bite his ear again so soon after that, there would, he said, be hell to pay. So, what the devil to do, he said he didn't know. Well, you know me, Bertie, being a woman with a heart like butter and always anxious to spread a little happiness as I pass by. I told him that if he wanted a bit of easy money to put his shirt on Jimmy's Simla for the big race. And I told him about the cat, just to make it quite clear to him that he would be betting on a sure thing. But put a sock in it and listen. Can't you stop talking for half a second? I know what you were going to say, that you were returning the cat, but this was before you told me, so I went ahead, fearing nothing, just thinking of the happiness I was bringing into his life. I ought to have known that a clergyman was bound to have scruples, but it didn't occur to me at the time. And to cut a long story short, he went to Jimmy and spilled the beans, and Jimmy blew his top. 'Take that cat back where it belongs,' he said, and a lot of stuff about being shocked and horrified, which wouldn't have mattered if he'd confined himself to telling me what he thought of me, but he didn't. He said that if that cat wasn't back at Cook's within the hour, he would scratch Simla's nomination. Yes, sir, he said Simla would not be among those present at the starting post, which meant that Bang would go the vast sum I'd put on his nose. But, yes, I know you had told me you were sending the cat back, but how was I to be sure that on thinking it over and realizing what a good thing it would be passing up, you hadn't changed your mind?" I could see what she meant. A nephew with a lust for gold and lacking the Wooster play-the-game spirit might quite well have done as she said. No wonder she'd been all of a doodah. It was a pleasure to set her mind at rest. "It's quite all right, old ancestor," I said. "Billy Graham was already en route for the cookeries and ought to have got there by now. Complete with cat, to the last drop. Not to worry. Not as far as Simla getting scratched is concerned. Well, that's a weight off my mind, though it's disappointing to feel that my bit of stuff isn't on a cert. Teach you not to nobble horses. Yes, there's that, I suppose." Some further talk followed, for an aunt who has got hold of a telephone receiver does not lightly relinquish it, but eventually she rang off, and I picked up Daffodil Days and gave it a casual glance. Its contents proved even less fit for human consumption than I'd expected. I turned away with rising nausea, and was thus enabled to get a good view of Herbert Graham, who was coming in from the kitchen. The suddenness of his appearance, coupled with the fact that I'd supposed him to be up at Eggersford Court, had made me bite my tongue, but in my concern I ignored the anguish. "Good Lord!" I ejaculated, if that's the word. "Sir?" "Haven't you gone yet? You should have been there and back by this time." "Very true, sir, but something occurred which prevented me from making the immediate start which I had intended." "What was that? Do they keep you a long time at the bank, counting your money?" Bitter, yes, but I thought justified. Wasted, however, for he did not wince beneath my sarcasm. "No, sir," he replied. "I bank in Bridmouth-on-Sea, and it is long past office hours. The occurrence to which I referred took place on these premises, in fact in this very room. I had gone to the kitchen to get the cat, which I had left there in its little basket, and I heard sounds proceeding from in here, and assuming that you were not at home, I went in to investigate, fearing that a burglar might have effected an entry. And there on the floor was a human form enveloped in a tablecloth. I raised this, and there underneath it was Mr. Cook, with a picture round his neck, vociferating something chronic." He paused, and I decided not to put him abreast. Never does to take fellows like Graham too fully into one's confidence. "Wrapped in a tablecloth, was he?" I said nonchalantly. "I suppose chaps like Cook are bound to get wrapped in tablecloth sooner or later." The sight affected me profoundly. "I bet it did. Sights like that do give one a start. But you soon got over it, eh?" "No, sir, I did not. And I'll tell you why I was what you might call stupefied. It was his language that did it chiefly. As I was saying, he expressed himself in a very violent manner, and I saw that it would be madness to proceed to Eggersford Court and possibly encounter him in this dangerous mood. I am a married man and have others to think of, so if you want that cat re-established in its former quarters, you'll have to get another operative to do it for you, or else nip up to the court and do it yourself." And while I looked at him with a wild surmise, silent upon a sitting-room carpet in maiden Eggersford, Somerset, he withdrew. I was still gazing at the spot where he'd been and thinking how crazy I must have been to let Jeeves wander off, frittering away his time, whooping it up with aunts, when I might have known I was bound to need his advice and moral support at any moment. And it was only after a bit that I realized the telephone was ringing. It was, as I rather expected it would be, my late father's sister Dahlia, and it was made clear immediately that she had just been hearing from Billy Graham and getting the bad news. In a moving passage in which she referred to him as a double-crossing rat, She said that he had formally refused to fulfil his sacred obligations.
He had some extraordinary story about finding cook in your cottage with a picture round his neck and a tablecloth over him, and of being scared of going near him. Sounded like raving to me.
And no, it was quite true.
You mean he really did have the picture round his neck and the tablecloth over him?
Yes.
How did he get that way?
We had a little argument, and that was how it worked out. She snorted in a rather febrile manner.
Are you telling me that you were responsible for the man Graham's cold feet?
In a measure, yes, and let me give you a brief account of the episode, I said, and did so. When I'd finished, she spoke again, and her manner was almost calm.
I might have known that if there was a chance of mucking up these very delicate negotiations, you would spring to the task. Well, as you're the cause of Graham walking out on us, you'll have to take his place.
I was expecting this. Graham himself, it will be remembered, had made the same suggestion. I was resolved to discourage it from the outset.
No,
I cried.
Did you say no?
Yes, 1,000 times no.
Scared, eh?
I am not ashamed to admit it.
You wouldn't be ashamed to admit practically anything. Where's your pride? Have you forgotten your illustrious ancestors? There was a Wooster at the time of the Crusades who would have won the Battle of Joppa single-handed, if he hadn't fallen off his horse. I dare say, but... And the one in the Peninsular War, Wellington always used to say he was the best spy he ever had.
Quite possibly, nevertheless.
You don't want to show yourself worthy of those splendid fellows?
Not if it involves crossing Cook's path again.
Well, if you won't, you won't. Poor old Tom, how you'll have to suffer. And talking of Tom, I had a letter from him this morning. It was all about the superb dinner Anatole had dished up on the previous night. He was absolutely lyrical. I must give it to you to read. Apparently Anatole has struck one of those veins of perfection which French chefs do occasionally strike. Tom says in a postscript, how dear Bertie would have enjoyed this.
I'm pretty shrewd, and I didn't miss the hideous unspoken threat behind her words. She was switching from the iron hand to the hand in the velvet glove, or rather the other way round, and letting me know without being crude about it that if I didn't allow myself to be bent to her will, she would put sanctions on me and bar me from Anatole's cooking. I made the great decision.
Say no more, old flesh and blood, I said. I will return the cat to store. And if while I am doing so Cook jumps out from behind a bush and tears me into 100 fragments, what of it? It will be merely one more grave among the hills. What did you say? Just my hero, said the aged relative.
Chapter 17. I was more to be pitied than censured, mind you, for quailing a bit in the cirques. A touch of the wee, sleek-it, timorous, cowering beastie is unavoidable when you're up against it, as I was. I remember once when I was faced with the task of defying my Aunt Agatha and stoutly refusing to put up her son Toss at my flat for his mid-term holiday from his school, and take him A, to the British Museum, B, to the National Gallery, and C, to a play at the Old Vic by a bloke of the name of Chekhov. Jeeves, in whom I'd confided the uneasiness I felt when contemplating the shape of things to come, told me my agitation was quite normal.
"Between the acting of a dreadful thing and the first motion," he said, "all the interim is like a phantasma or a hideous dream. The genius and the mortal instruments are then in council, and the state of man, like to a little kingdom, suffers the nature of an insurrection."
I could have put it better myself, but I saw what he meant. At these times your feet are bound to get chilly, and there's nothing you can do about it. I hid my tremors. A lifetime of getting socks on the jaw from the fist of fate have made Bertram Wooster's face an inscrutable mask, and no one would have suspected that I was not as calm as an oyster on the half-shell as I started out for Eggersford Court with the cat. But actually, behind those granite features, I was far from being tranquil. Indeed, you wouldn't have been wrong in saying that I was as jumpy as the above cat would have been on hot bricks. I never know when I'm telling a tale of peril and suspense, whether to charge straight ahead, or whether to pause from time to time and bung in what is called atmosphere. Some prefer the first way, others the second. For the benefit of the latter, I will state that it was a nice evening, with gentle breezes blowing, and stars peeping out, and the scent of growing things, and all that. And then I can get down to the rays. It was dark when I reached the Cook premises, which suited me, for I had dark work to do. I halted the car about halfway up the drive, and took the short cut across country. My best friends would have warned me that I was asking for trouble, and they would have been right. The visibility being poor, the terrain lumpy, and the cat wriggling, it was a pretty safe bet that sooner or later I would come a perler. This I did as I approached the stables. I struck a wet patch. My feet slid from under me. The cat shot from my arms, falling to earth I know not where, and I found myself face down in what was unquestionably mud, which had been there some time, and had had a number of unpleasant substances thrown into it. I remember thinking as I extracted myself that it was lucky I wasn't on my way to mix in company, as that mud must have taken at least 80% off my glamour. It was not Bertie Wooster, the natty boulevardier, who started to return to the car, but one of the dregs of society who had got his clothes off a handy scarecrow, and had slept in them. I say started to return, for I had not gone more than a yard or two when something solid bumped against my leg, and I became aware that I had been joined by a dog of formidable physique, none other than the one I had exchanged civilities with at Wee Nook. I recognized him by his ears. At our former meeting, overcome by having found what he instantly recognized as one of the right sort, he had made the welkin ring in his enthusiasm. I urged him in an undertone to preserve a tactful silence now, for you never knew what minions of Pop Cook might be abroad in the night, and my presence would be difficult to explain. But there was no reasoning with him. At Wee Nook he had found the Worcester aroma roughly equivalent to Chanel No. 5, and it was as if he were trying now to assure me that he was not the dog to be put off a pal just because the pal's scent had deteriorated somewhat. It's the soul that counts, you could hear him saying to himself between barks. Well, I appreciated the compliment, of course, but I was not my usual debonair self, for I feared the worst. Barking like this, I felt, could not go unheard unless Cook's outdoor staff had been recruited entirely from deaf adders. And I was right. Somewhere off stage a voice shouted, "Hey!" making it clear that Bertram, as so often before, was about to cop it amidships. I gave the dog a reproachful look. Not much good in that light, of course. I was recalling the story they used to read to me in my childhood, the one about the fellow who had written a book and his dog Diamond chewed up the manuscript. The point being what a decent chap the fellow was, because all he said was, "Ah, Diamond, Diamond, you little know what you have done." It ought to be "thou little knowest," and "what thou hast done," but I can't do the dialect. I feature the story because I was equally restrained. "I told you not to bark, you silly ass," was my only comment, and as I spoke the shouter, who had shouted "Hey," came up. He had not made a good impression on me from the start, because his voice had reminded me of the sergeant major who used to come twice a week to drill us at the private school where I won the Scripture Knowledge Prize, which I may have mentioned once or twice. The sergeant major's voice had been like a vehicle full of tin cans going over gravel, and so was the "Hey" chap's. Some relation, perhaps. It was pretty dark, of course, by now, but the visibility was good enough to enable me to see that there was something else I didn't like about this creature of the night, viz., that he was shoving a whacking great shotgun against my midriff. Taken for all in all, a bloke to be conciliated with soft speech, rather than struck in the mazzard. I tried speech, keeping it as soft as I could manage, with my teeth chattering. "A nice evening," I said. "I wonder if you could direct me to the village of Maiden Eggersford," and would have gone on to explain that I'd been for a country ramble and had lost my way. But I don't think he was listening, because all he did was bellow, "Henry!" presumably addressing a colleague called Henry something, and a voice that might have been that of the sergeant major's son replied, "Yes, come here." "Where?" "Here. Want to hear?" "I'm having me supper." "Well, stop having it and come here. I've crushed a chap after the horses." He had found the right talking point. Henry was plainly a man who let nothing stand between him and his duty. When Dee called, he abandoned his eggs and bacon, or whatever it was, and hastened to answer the summons. In next to no time he was with us. The dog had disappeared. It was a dog, no doubt, with all sorts of interests, and could give only a certain amount of its attention to each. Having sniffed my trouser legs and put his front paws on my chest, it felt that the time had come to seek other fields of endeavour. Henry had a torch with him. He let it play on me. "Cool," he said. "Is this him?" "Arr." "Nasty, slinking-looking bleeder?" "Arr." "He don't have to sniff?" "Arr." "Brings to mind that old song, it ain't all violets." "Lavender." "Violets, I always thought." "No, lavender." "Well, have it your own way. What are you going to do with him?" "Take him to Mr. Cook." The prospect of another meeting with Pop Cook under such conditions, and after what had occurred between us, was naturally distasteful to me. But there seemed little I could do about it, for at this moment Henry attached himself to my collar, and we moved off, his associate prodding me in the back with his gun. They took me to the house, where we were ill-received by a butler, annoyed at being interrupted while smoking an off-duty pipe. He further resented being confronted with what he called tramps, who smelled like something gone wrong with the drains. I didn't know what I'd fallen into, but it was becoming abundantly evident that it had been something rather special. The whole tone of the public's reaction to my society emphasized this. The butler was very definite about everything. No, he said, they couldn't see Mr. Cook. Were they under the impression, he asked, that Mr. Cook was wearing a gas mask? In any case, he added, even if I had been smelling like new-mown hay, Mr. Cook could not be disturbed, because he had a gentleman with him. Shut the fellow up in one of the stables, why don't you? The butler said, and this was what my proposer and seconder decided to do. I cannot too strongly recommend those of my readers who are thinking of getting shut up in stables to abandon the idea, for there is no percentage in it. It's stuffy, it's dark, and there's nowhere to sit except the floor. Odd squeaking noises and sinister scratching noises make themselves heard from time to time, suggesting that rats are getting up an appetite before starting to chew you to the bone. After my escort had left me, I shuffled about a good deal, with a view to finding some way of removing myself from as morale-testing a position as I'd been in since I was so high. But the only method which occurred to me was to catch a rat and train it to gnaw through the door. However, that would take time, and I was anxious to get home and go to bed. I had groped my way to the door as I was weighing the pros and cons of this rat sequence, and automatically, my mind on other things, I gave the handle a twiddle, more by way of something to do than because I expected anything to come of it, and shiver my timbers if the door didn't come open. I thought at first that my guardian angel, who had been noticeably lethargic up to this point, had taken a stiff shot of vitamin something, and had become the ball of fire he ought to have been right along. But reflection told me what must have happened. There had been confusion between the two principals, arising from inadequate planning. Each had thought the other had turned the key, with the result that it had remained unturned. It just showed how foolish it is to embark on any enterprise without first having a frank round-table conference, conducted in an atmosphere of the utmost cordiality. It was difficult to think which of the two would kick himself harder when it was drawn to their attention that they'd lost their Bertram. But though I was now as free as the air, as you might say, I could see that it behooved me, if behooved is the word I want, to watch my step with the utmost vigilance. It would be too silly to run into Henry and the other bloke again and get bunged into durance, whatever it's called, once more. I wanted complete freedom from both of them. Probably quite decent chaps when you got to know them, but definitely not for me. Their sphere of influence was no doubt confined to the stable-yard and neighbourhood, so it would be safe to leave by the route I'd come by, but I shrank from doing that, because I might meet that mud again. The thing to do was to roam about till I found the drive and go down it to where I'd left the car. This I proceeded to do, and I had rounded the house and was crossing a lawn of sorts, when something gleamed in front of me, and before I could stop myself I was stepping into a swimming pool.
It was with mixed emotions that I rose to the surface. Surprise was one of them, for I hadn't thought that Cook was the sort of fellow to have a swimming pool. Another was annoyance. I am not accustomed to bathing with all my clothes on, though there was that occasion at the Drones when Tuppy Glossop bet me I couldn't swing across the pool by the rings, and I was reaching the last one when I found he'd roped it back, causing me to fall into the fluid in correct evening costume. But oddly enough, the emotion which stood out from the mixture was one of pleasure. Left to myself, I wouldn't have indulged in these aquatic sports, but now that I was in, I was quite enjoying my dip, and there was the agreeable thought that this would do much to reduce the bouquet I had been giving out. What I had needed to enable me to rejoin the human herd without exciting adverse comment had been a good rinsing. So I did not hurry to leave the pool, but floated there like a water lily, or perhaps it would be better to say like a dead fish. And I had been doing so for some minutes when there was that old familiar sound of barking in the night, and I gathered that my friend the dog had found another soulmate. I paused in my floating. I didn't like this. It suggested that Henry and his pal, the man behind the gun, were on the prowl again. What more likely than that they had got together and compared notes about locking the door and rushed to the stable and found me conspic by my absence? I stiffened till my resemblance to a dead fish was even more striking than it had been, and I was still rigid when I heard the sound of galloping feet, as if somebody in a hurry were coming my way, and a human form splashed into the pool beside me. That this had not been an intentional move on the human form's part was made clear by his opening remark on rising to the surface. It was the word "help," and I had no difficulty in recognizing the voice of Orlo Porter. "Help!" he repeated. "Oh, hello, Porter," I said. "Do you say help?" "Yes." "Can't you swim?" "No." "Then," I was about to say, "then surely it was rash to come bathing," but I refrained, feeling that it would not be tactful. "Then you could probably do with a helping hand," I said. He said he could, and I gave him one. We were at the deep end, and I hauled him into the shallow end, where he immediately became more at his ease. Spitting out perhaps a couple of pints of water, he thanked me, brokenly, as you might say, and I begged him not to mention it. "Quite a surprise meeting you like this," I said. "What are you doing in these parts, Porter?" "Call me Orlo." "What are you doing in these parts, Orlo? Watching owls?" "I came to see that blasted Cook, Wooster." "Call me Bertie." "I came to see that blasted Cook, Bertie. You remember your advice? Approach the old child of unmarried parents after he's had his dinner, you said, and the more I thought about it, the sounder the idea seemed. You really have an extraordinary flair, Bertie. You read your fellow man like a book." "Oh, thanks. Just a matter of studying the psychology of the individual." "Unfortunately, you can't judge someone like Cook by ordinary standards. Do you know why this is, Bertie?" "No, Orlo, why?" "Because he's a hellhound, and there's no telling what a hellhound will do. Planning strategy is hopeless when you're dealing with hellhounds." "I gather that things did not go altogether as planned." "And how right you are, Bertie. The thing was a flop. It couldn't have been a worse flop if I'd been trying to get money out of a combination of Scrooge and Gaspard the Miser." "Tell me all, Orlo." "If you have a moment, Bertie." "All the time in the world, Orlo." "You don't want to hurry away anywhere?" "No, I like it here." "So do I. Pleasantly cool, is it not? Well, then, I arrived and told the butler I wanted to see Mr. Cook on a matter of importance, and the butler took me to the library, where I found Cook smoking a fat cigar. I was confident when I saw it that I'd chosen my time right. The cigar was plainly an after-dinner cigar, and he was drinking brandy. There could be no doubt that the man was full to the back teeth. You're following me, Bertie?" "I get the picture, Orlo." "There was another man there, some sort of African explorer, I gathered." "Major Plank." "His presence was an embarrassment because he would insist on telling us all about the fertility rights of the natives of Bongo on the Congo, which, take it from me, are too improper for words. But he left us after a while, and I was able to get down to business. And a lot of good it did me. Cook refused to part with a penny." I put a question which had been in my mind for some time. I don't say I'd actually been worrying about Orlo's financial position, but it had seemed to me to need explaining. "What exactly is the arrangement about your money? Surely Cook can't just hang on to it." "He can till I'm 30. "Well, how old are you?" 27.
Then, in another 3 years... For the first time he showed a flash of the old Orlo porter who had been so anxious to tear out my insides with his bare hands. He didn't actually foam at the mouth, but I could see that he missed it by the closest of margins.
"But I don't want to wait another 3 years, damn it! Do you know what my insurance company pays me? A pittance, barely enough to keep body and soul together on. And I'm a man who likes nice things. I want to branch out."
"A Mayfair flat?"
"Yes."
"Champagne with every meal?"
"Exactly."
"Rolls Royces?"
"Those two."
"Leaving something over, of course, to slip to the hard-up proletariat? You'd like them to have what you don't need."
"There won't be anything I don't need."
It was a little difficult to know what to say. I'd never talked things over with a communist before, and it came as something of a shock to find that he wasn't so fond of the hard-up proletariat as I'd supposed. I thought of advising him not to let the boys at the Kremlin hear him expressing such views, but decided that it was none of my business. I changed the subject. "By the way, Orlo," I said, "what brought you here?"
"Haven't you been listening? I came to see Cook."
I mean, how did you come to fall into the pool?"
"I didn't know it was there."
"You seem to be running very fast. What was your hurry?"
"I was escaping from a dog which was attacking me."
"A large dog with stand-up ears?"
"Yes. You know it?"
"We've met, but it wasn't attacking you."
"It sprang on me."
"In a purely friendly spirit it springs on everyone. It's its way of being matey." He drew a long breath of relief. It would have been longer had he not lost his footing and disappeared into the depths. I reached about for him and hauled him up, and he thanked me. "A pleasure," I said.
"You have taken a weight off my mind, Bertie. I was wondering how I could get back in safety to the inn."
"I'll give you a lift in my car."
"No, thanks. Now that you've explained the purity of that dog's motives, I'd rather walk. I don't want to catch cold. By the way, Bertie, there's just one point I'd like you to clarify for me. What are you doing here?"
"Just strolling around."
"It struck me as odd that you should have been in the pool."
"Oh, no, just cooling off, Orlo, just cooling off."
"I see. Well, good night, Bertie."
"Good night, Orlo."
"I can rely on the accuracy of your information about the dog?"
"Completely, Orlo. His life is gentle, and the elements mixed in him just right," I said, remembering a gag of Jeeves's. It was with water dripping from my person in all directions, but with a song in my heart, as the expression is, that some minutes later I climbed from the pool and started to where I'd left the car. In addition to having a song in it, my heart ought, of course, to have been bleeding for Orlo, for I realized how long it was going to take him to get all those nice things we'd been talking about. But the ecstasy of having parted from the cat left little room for sympathy for other people's troubles. My concern for Orlo was, I regret to say, about equal to his for the hard-up proletariat. All was quiet on the Cook front, no sign of Henry and his pal. The dog, after fraternizing with Orlo, had apparently curled up somewhere and was getting his 8 hours. I drove on. The song in my heart rose to fortissimo as I got out of the car at the door of Weenook, only to die away in a gurgle as something soft and furry brushed against my leg, and looking down I saw the familiar form of the cat. Chapter 18. I should have to check with Jeeves, but I think the word to describe the way I slept that night is fitfully. I turned and twisted like an adagio dancer, and no wonder, for what I've heard Jeeves call the fell clutch of circumstance, which was clutching me, was not the ordinary fell clutch that can be wriggled out of by some simple ruse such as going on a voyage round the world and not showing up again till things have blown over. I had the option, of course, of disassociating myself entirely from the cat sequence and refusing to have anything more to do with the ruddy animal. But this would mean Colonel Briscoe's scratching Simler's nomination, which would mean that a loved aunt would lose a packet and have to touch Uncle Tom to make up the deficit, which would mean upsetting the latter's gastric juices for one didn't know how long, which would mean him pushing his plate away untasted night after night, which would make Anatole, temperamental like all geniuses, getting deeply offended and handing in his resignation. Ruin, desolation, and despair all around. In short, manifestly, I think it's manifestly. The chivalry of the Woosters could not permit all that to happen. Somehow, whatever the perils involved, the cat had to be decanted somewhere, where it could find its way back to its GHQ. But who was to do the decanting? Billy Graham had made it plain that no purse of gold, however substantial, could persuade him to brave the horrors of Eggersford Court, that sinister house. Jeeves had formally declared himself a non-starter, and Aunt Dahlia was disqualified by her unfortunate inability to move from spot to spot without having twigs snap beneath her feet. This put the issue squarely up to Bertram, and no chance for him to do a nolli prosequi, because if he did, bang went his hopes, for quite a time at least, of enjoying Anatole's cooking. It was consequently in sombre mood that I went across to the Goose and Grasshopper for breakfast. I do not, as a rule, take the morning meal at 6:30, but I had been awake since 4, and the pangs of hunger could be resisted no longer. If there was one thing I had taken for granted, it was that I would be breakfasting alone. My surprise, therefore, at finding Orlo in the dining-room, tucking into eggs and bacon, was considerable. I couldn't imagine how he came to be in circulation at such an hour. Bird-watchers, of course, are irregular in their habits, but even if he had an appointment with a Clarkson's warbler, you would have expected him to have made it for much nearer lunch.
"Oh, hello, Bertie," he said. "Glad to see you."
"You're up early, Orlo?"
"A little before my usual time. I don't want to keep Vanessa waiting."
"You asked her to breakfast?"
"No, she will have had breakfast. Our date was for 7:30. She may, of course, be late. It depends on how soon she can find the keys of the garage."
"Why does she want the key of the garage?"
"To get the Bentley."
"Why does she want the Bentley?"
"My dear Bertie, we've got to elope in something."
"Elope?"
"I ought to have explained that earlier. Yes, we're eloping, and thank goodness we've got a fine day for it. Ah, here are your eggs. You'll enjoy them. They're very good at the Goose and Grasshopper. Come, no doubt, from contented hens."
On seating myself at the table, I had ordered eggs, and, as he justly observed, they were excellent. But I dug into them listlessly. I was too bewildered to give them the detached thought they deserved. "Do you mean to say," I said, "that you and Vanessa are eloping?"
"The only sensible, sober course to pursue. This comes as a surprise."
"You could knock me down with a ham sandwich."
"What seems to be puzzling you?"
"I thought you weren't on speaking terms." His response was a hyena-esque guffaw. It was plain that he was feeling his oats to no little extent, quite naturally, of course, Vanessa being the tree on which the fruit of his life hung, as I've heard it described. It made me reflect on the extraordinary extent to which tastes can differ. I, as I have shown, though momentarily attracted by her radiant beauty, had frozen in every limb at the prospect of linking my lot with hers, whereas he was obviously all for it. In just the same way my Uncle Tom dances around in circles if he can get hold at enormous expense of a silver oviform chocolate pot of the Queen Anne period, which I wouldn't be seen in public with. Curious. He continued to guffaw.
"You aren't up to the minute with your society gossip, Bertie. That's all a thing of the past. Admittedly, relations were at times strained, and harsh words spoken about the colour of my liver, but we had a complete reconciliation last night."
"Oh, you met her last night?"
"Shortly after I left you. She was taking a stroll preparatory to going to bed, and bedewing her pillow with salt tears."
"Why should she do that?"
"Because she thought she was going to marry you."
"I see. The fate that is worse than death, you might say."
"Exactly."
"Sorry she was troubled."
"Quite all right. She soon got over it when I told her I'd been seeing Cook and demanding my money. When she heard that I had several times thumped the table, her remorse for having called me a sleek-it, cowering, timorous beastie was pitiful. She compared me with heroes of old Greek legend, to their disadvantage, and to cut a long story short, flung herself into my arms."
"She must have got wet."
"Very wet, but she didn't mind that. An emotional girl wouldn't."
"I suppose not."
"We then decided to elope. You may be wondering what we're going to live on, but with my salary and a bit of money she has from the will of an aunt, we shall be all right. So it was arranged that she should have an early breakfast, go to the garage, pinch the Bentley and put the other cars out of action, leaving Cook for pursuing purposes only the gardener's Ford."
"Well, that ought to fix him."
I think so. It is an excellent car for its purpose, but scarcely adapted to chasing daughters across country. Cook will never catch up with us.
Though I don't see what he could do, even if he did catch up with you.
You don't? What about that hunting crop of his?
Ah, yes. I see what you mean. I don't know if he would have developed this theme, but before he could speak there came from the street a musical tooting.
"There she is," he said,
and went out. So did I. I had no wish to meet Vanessa. I slid out of the back door and returned to Wee Nook. And I had picked up By Order of the Tsar, and was hoping to discover what it was that he had ordered, my bet being that a lot of characters with names ending in ski would be off to Siberia before they knew what had hit them, when who should enter hurriedly but Orlo? He had an envelope in his hand.
"Oh, there you are, Bertie," he said. "I can only stop a minute. Vanessa's out there in the car."
Ask her to come in."
"She won't come in. She says it will be too painful for you."
"What would?"
"Meeting her, you ass. Gazing on her when you knew she is another's."
"Oh, I see."
"No sense in giving yourself a lot of agony if you don't have to."
Quite.
"I wouldn't have disturbed you, only I wanted to give you this letter. It's a note I've written to Cook in place of the one Vanessa wrote last night."
"Oh, she wrote him a note?"
"Yes."
"To be pinned to her pincushion?"
"Well, that was the idea, but she dropped it somewhere and couldn't be bothered to hunt around for it. So I thought I'd better send him a line. If you're running away with a man's daughter, it's only civil to let him know. And I would put the facts before him much better than she would. Girls are apt not to stick to the point when writing letters. With the best intentions in the world, they ramble and embroider. A university-trained man like myself who contributes to the New Statesman does not fall into this blunder. He is concise, he is lucid."
"I didn't know you wrote for the New Statesman."
"Occasional letters to the editor, and I rarely fail to enter for the weekly competitions."
"Absorbing work."
"Very."
"I'm a writer of sorts myself. When my Aunt Dahlia was running that paper of hers, Milady's Boudoir, I did a piece for it on what the well-dressed man is wearing."
"Did you indeed? Next time we meet you must tell me all about it. Can't stop now, Vanessa's waiting, and—"
he added, as the tooting of a horn broke the morning stillness.
"Getting impatient. Here's the letter."
"You want me to take it to Cook?"
"What do you think I wanted you to do with it? Get it framed?"
And so saying, he legged it like a nymph surprised while bathing, and I picked up my By Order of the Tsar. As I did so, I was thinking bitterly that I wished the general public would stop regarding me as an uncomplaining "hey you," on whom all the unpleasant jobs could be shovelled off. Whenever something sticky was afoot and action had to be taken, the cry was sure to go up, "Let Wooster do it." I have already touched on my Aunt Agatha's tendency to unload her foul son Toss on me at all seasons. My Aunt Dahlia had blotted the sunshine from my life in the matter of the cat, and here was Orlo Porter coolly telling me to take the letter to Cook, as if entering Cook's presence in his present difficult mood wasn't much the same as joining Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of whom I'd read when I won that Scripture Knowledge Prize at my private school, on their way to the burning fiery furnace. What, I asked myself, was to be done? It was a dilemma which might well have baffled a lesser man, but the whole point about the Woosters is that they are not lesser men. I don't suppose it was more than 3/4 of an hour before the solution flashed on me, viz., to write Cook's name and address on the envelope, stick a stamp on it, and post it. Having decided to do this, I returned to my reading. But everything seemed to conspire today to prevent me from making any real progress with By Order of the Tsar. Scarcely had I perused a paragraph when the door burst open, and I found that I was seeing Cook after all. He was standing on the threshold looking like the Demon King in a pantomime. With him was Major Plank. Chapter 19. I've always rather prided myself on being a good host, putting visitors at their ease with debonair smiles and courteous wisecracks. But I am compelled to admit that at the sight of these two I didn't come within a mile of achieving this, and the best I could do in the way of wisecracks was a hoarse cry like that of a Pekingese with laryngitis. It was left to Plank to get the conversation going.
"We're in luck, Cook," he said. "They haven't started yet, because if they had," he added, reasoning closely, "the bounder wouldn't be here, would he?" "You're right," said Cook. Then addressing me, "Where is my daughter, you scoundrel?" "Yes, where is she, rat?"
said Plank, and I suddenly came over all calm. From being a Pekingese with throat trouble, I turned in a flash into one of those fellows in historical novels who flick a speck of dust from the irreproachable Mechlin lace at their wrists, preparatory to making the bad guys feel like pieces of cheese. Because with my quick intelligence I'd spotted that the parties of the second part had got all muddled up, and that I was in a position to score off them as few parties of the second part had ever been scored off. "Fill me in on 2 points, Messrs. Plank and Cook, if you will be so good," I said. "A. Why are you taking up space in my cottage, which I require for other purposes? And B. What the hell are you talking about? What is all this song and dance about daughters?"
"Trying to brazen it out," said Plank. "I told you he would. He reminds me of a man I knew in East Africa, always trying to brazen things out. If you caught him with his fingers in your cigar box, he would say it was just tidying the cigars. Fellow named Abercrombie Smith, eventually eaten by a crocodile on the lower Zambezi. But even he had to give up when confronted with overwhelming evidence. Confront this blighter with the overwhelming evidence, Cook."
"I will," said Cook, producing an envelope from his pocket. "I have here a letter from my daughter, signed Vanessa."
"A very important point,"
said Plank. "I will read it to you. Dear father, I am going away with the man I love."
"Let's see him wriggle out of that,"
said Plank. "Yes," said Cook.
"What have you to say?"
"Merely this," I riposted. I was thinking how mistaken Orlo had been in asserting that girls rambled when writing letters. Anything more lucid and concise than this one I'd never come across. Possibly, I felt, Vanessa too was a contributor to the New Statesman. "Cook," I said, "you are labouring under a what-you-call-it."
"See?" said Plank. "Didn't I say he would try to brazen it out?"
"This letter does not refer to me."
"Are you denying that you are the man my daughter loves?"
"That's just what I am denying."
"In spite of the fact that she's always in and out of this beastly cottage and is probably at this moment hiding under the bed in the spare room?"
said Plank, continuing to shove his oar in the most unnecessary manner. These African explorers have no tact, no reticence. "May I explain?" I said. "The chap you're looking for is Orlo Porter. They fell for each other when she was in London, and love has been burgeoning ever since, if burgeoning means what I think it means, until they felt they could bear being separated no longer, so she pinched your car and they've driven off together to the registrar's." It didn't go well. Cook said I was lying, and Plank said of course I was, adding that the more he saw of me, the more I reminded him of Abercrombie Smith, who, he said, would undoubtedly have done a long stretch in chokey if the crocodile hadn't taken things into its own hands. I should have mentioned that in the course of these exchanges, Cook's complexion had been steadily deepening. It now looked like a drone's club tie, which is a rich purple. There was talk at one time of having it crimson with white spots, but the supporters of that view were outvoted.
"How dare you have the insolence to suppose that I'm fool enough to believe this story of my daughter being in love with Orlo Porter?" he thundered. "As if any girl in her senses would love Orlo Porter." "Ridiculous," said Plank. "Vanessa would turn from him in disgust." "On her heel," said Plank. "What she can see in you, I cannot imagine." "Nor can I," said Plank. "He's got a beard like one of those Victorian novelists. Revolting spectacle."
It was true that I hadn't shaved this morning, but this was going too far. I don't mind criticism, but I will not endure vulgar abuse. "Pfooey," I said. It is an expression I don't often use, but Noir Wolfe is always saying it with excellent results, and it seemed to fit in rather well here. "Enough of this back chat. Read this," I said, handing Cook Orlo's letter. I must say his reception of what Plank would have called the overwhelming evidence was all that could be desired. His jaw fell, he snorted, his face crumpled up like a sheet of carbon paper.
"Good God!"
he gurgled.
"What is it?"
asked Plank.
"What's the matter?" "This is from Porter saying that he's eloped with Vanessa. Probably a forgery." "No, Porter's writing is unmistakable."
He choked.
"Mr. Wooster, "Don't call him Mr. Wooster as if he were a respectable member of society," said Plank. "He's a desperate criminal who once came within an ace of stinging me for £5. He is known to the police as Alpine Joe. Address him as that. Wooster is only a pen name."
Cook did not seem to have listened, and I didn't blame him.
"Mr. Wooster, I owe you an apology."
I decided to temper justice with M. No sense in grinding the poor old buster beneath the iron heel. True, he had been extremely offensive, but in a man who has lost his daughter and his cat within a day or two of each other, much must be excused. "And don't give it another thought, my dear fellow," I said. "We all make mistakes. I forgive you freely. If this little misunderstanding has taught you not to speak till you are sure of your facts, it will have been time well spent." I had paused, speculating as to whether I wasn't being a bit too patronizing, when somebody said, "Meow," in a low voice, and looking down I saw that the cat had strolled in. And if ever a cat chose the wrong moment for getting the party spirit and wanting to mix with the boys, this cat was that cat. I looked at it with a wild surmise, as silent as those bimbos on the peak in Darien. With both hands pressed to the top of my head to prevent it from taking to itself the wings of a dove and soaring to the ceiling, I was asking myself what the harvest would be. I was speedily informed on this point.
"Ha!"
said Cook, scooping up the animal and pressing it to his bosom. He seemed to have lost all interest in eloping daughters.
"I told you it must have been Alpine Joe who was the kidnapper," said Plank. "That was why he was hanging about the stables that day. He was waiting his chance. Biding his time. And he hasn't a word to say for himself."
He was right. I was unable to utter. I couldn't clear myself by exposing the aged relative at the bar of world opinion. I couldn't make them believe that I was going to return the cat. You might have described me as being trapped in the net of fate, if you'd happened to think of the expression. And when that happens to you, it's no use saying anything. Ask the boys in Dartmoor or Pentonville. I could only trust that joy at recovering his lost one might soften Cook's heart and make him let me off lightly. Not a hope.
"I shall insist on an exemplary sentence," he said. "And meanwhile," said Plank in that offensively officious way of his, "shall I be hitting him on the head with my stick? The Zulu knob kerry would be better, but I left it up at the house." "I was going to ask you to go for a policeman." "While you do what?" "While I take the cat back to Potato Chip." "Suppose while we're both gone he does a bunk." "You have a point there." "When anyone is caught stealing in Bongo on the Congo, they tie him down on an anthill until they can get hold of the Walla Walla, as judges are called in the native dialect. Makes it awkward for accused if he isn't fond of ants, and the Walla Walla is away for the weekend. But into each life some rain must fall, and he ought to have thought of that before he started pinching things. We're short of ants, of course, but we can tie him to the sofa. It only means pulling down a couple of curtain cords." "Then by all means let us do as you suggest." "Better gag him. We don't want him yelling for help." "My dear Plank, you think of everything."
I am a great reader of novels of suspense, and I'd often wondered how the heroes of them felt when the heavy tied them up, as he generally did about halfway through. I was now in a position to get a rough idea, but of course only a rough one, for they were pretty nearly always attached to a barrel of gunpowder with a lighted candle on top of it, which must have made the whole thing considerably more poignant. I had been spared this, what you might call, added attraction, but even so I was far from being in a sunny mood. I think it was the gag which contributed most to the lowering of my spirits. Plank had inserted his tobacco pouch between my upper and lower teeth, and it tasted far too strongly of African explorer to be agreeable. It was a great relief when I heard a footstep and realized that Jeeves had returned from revelling with Mrs. P.B. Piggott of Balmoral, Mafeking Road. "Good morning, sir," he said. He expressed no surprise at seeing me tied to a sofa with curtain cords, just as he would have no S if he had seen me being eaten by a crocodile like the late Abercrombie Smith, though in the latter case he might have heaved a regretful sigh. Assuming that I would prefer to be without them, he removed the gag and unfastened my bonds. "Have you breakfasted, sir?" he asked. I told him I had. "Perhaps some coffee, sir?" "A great idea, and make it strong," I said, hoping that it would wash the taste of Plank's tobacco pouch away. "And when you return, I shall a tale unfold which will make you jump as if you'd sat on a fretful porpentine." I was quite wrong, of course. I doubt if he would do much more than raise an eyebrow if, when entering his pantry, he found one of those peculiar fauna from the Book of Revelations in the sink. When he returned with the steaming pot and I unfolded my tale, he listened attentively, but gave no indication that he recognized that what he was listening to was front-page stuff. Only when I told him of the clicking of Orlo and Vanessa, releasing me from my honourable obligations to the latter, did a flicker of interest disturb his frozen features. I think he might have unbent to the extent of offering me respectful congratulations, had not Plank come bounding in. He was alone. I could have told him it was hopeless to try to get hold of the maiden Eggersford police force at that time of day. There was only one of it, and in the morning he does his rounds on his bicycle. Seeing Jeeves, he registered astonishment. "Inspector Witherspoon!" he cried. "Amazing how you Scotland Yard fellows always get your man. I suppose you've been on Alpine Joe's trail for weeks like a stoat and a rabbit." Little did he know that Inspector Witherspoon, the man who never sleeps, was watching his every move. Well, you couldn't have come up with him at a better moment, for in addition to whatever the police want him for, he has stolen a valuable cat belonging to my friend Cook. We caught him red-handed, or as red-handed as it is possible to be when stealing cats. But I'm surprised that you should have untied him from the sofa. I always thought the one thing the police were fussy about was the necessity of leaving everything untouched." I must say, I was what is called at a loss of words, but luckily Jeeves had plenty. "I fail to understand you," he said, his voice and manner so chilly that Plank must have been wishing he was wearing his winter woolies. "And may I ask why you address me as Inspector Witherspoon? I am not Inspector Witherspoon." Plank clicked his tongue impatiently. "Of course you are," he said. "I remember you distinctly. You will be telling me next day that you didn't arrest this man at my place in Gloucestershire for trying to obtain £5 from me by false pretences." Jeeves had no irreproachable Mechlin lace at his wrist, or he would unquestionably have flicked a speck of dust off it. He increased the coldness of his manner. "You are mistaken in every respect," he said. "Mr. Wooster has ample means. It seems scarcely likely, therefore, that he would have attempted to obtain a mere £5 from you. I can speak with authority as to Mr. Wooster's financial standing, for I am his solicitor and prepare his annual income tax return." "So there you are, Plank," I said. "It must be obvious to every thinking man that you have been having hallucinations, possibly the result of getting a touch of the sun, while making a pest of yourself to the natives of equatorial Africa. If I were you, I'd pop straight back to E.J. Murgatroyd and have him give you something for it. You don't want that sort of thing to spread. You'll look silly if it goes too far and we have to bury you before sundown." Plank was plainly shaken. He could not pale beneath his tan, because he had so much tan that it was impossible to pale beneath it. I'm not sure I'd put that exactly right. What I mean is that he may have paled, but you couldn't see it because of his sunburn. But he was looking very thoughtful. I knew what was passing in his mind. He was wondering how he was going to explain to Cook, whom, by tying people to sofas, he had rendered liable for heavy damages for assault and battery, and all sorts of things. These African explorers think quick. It took him about 5 seconds flat to decide not to stay and explain to Cook. Then he was out of the room in a flash, his destination presumably Bongo on the Congo, or somewhere similar where the arm of the law couldn't touch him. I don't suppose he'd shown a brisker turn of speed since the last time he thought the natives seemed friendly and had decided to stay the night, only to have them come after him with assegais. My first move after he had left us was, of course, to pay a marked tribute to Jeeves for his services and cooperation. This done, we struck the more social note. "Did you have a good time last night, Jeeves?" "Extremely enjoyable, thank you, sir." "How was your aunt?"
At first somewhat dispirited.
Why was that?
She'd lost her cat, sir. On leaving for her holiday, she placed it in the charge of a friend, and it had strayed.
I gasped. A sudden idea had struck me. We Woosters are like that. We're always getting struck by sudden ideas. Jeeves! Could it be... Do you think it's possible?
Yes, sir. She described the animal to me in minute detail, and there can be no doubt that it is the one now in residence at Eggersford Court.
I danced a carefree dance step. I know a happy ending when I see one. Then we've got Cook cold.
So it would seem, sir.
We go to him and tell him he can carry on, plus cat, till the race is over, paying, of course, a suitable sum to your aunt. Lend-lease, isn't it called?
Yes, sir.
And in addition we make it a proviso, it is proviso,
yes, sir,
that he gives Orlo Porter his money. I'd like to see Orlo fixed up. He can't refuse, because he must have the cat, and if he tries an in nolli prosequis as regards Orlo, we slap an assault and battery suit on him. Am I right, Jeeves?
Indubitably, sir.
And another thing, I've thought for some time that the hectic rush and swirl of life in maiden Eggersford can scarcely be what E. Jimson Murgatroyd had in mind when he sent me to the country to get a complete rest. What I need is something quieter, more peaceful, as it might be in New York. And if I am mugged, what of it? It's probably all right getting mugged when you're used to it. Do you agree, Jeeves?
Yes, sir.
And you are in favour of bearding Pop Cook?
Yes, sir.
Then let's go. My car is outside. Next stop, Eggersford Court. Chapter 20. The last chapter. It was about a week after we had arrived in New York that, coming to the breakfast table one morning, rejoicing in my youth, if I remember rightly, I found a letter with an English stamp lying by my plate. Not recognizing the writing, I pushed it aside, intending to get at it later after I'd fortified myself with a square meal. I generally do this with the letters I get at breakfast time, because if they're stinkers and you read them on an empty stomach, you start your day all wrong. And in these disturbed times you don't often find people writing anything but stinkers. Some half-hour later, refreshed and strengthened, I opened the envelope, and no wonder the writing had seemed unfamiliar, for it was from Uncle Tom, and he hadn't written to me since I was at my private school, when, to do him credit, he'd always enclosed a postal order for 5 or 10 bob. He hauled up his slacks thus: "Dear Bertie, you will doubtless be surprised at hearing from me. I am writing for your aunt, who has met with an unfortunate accident, and is compelled to wear her arm in a sling. This occurred during the concluding days of her visit to some friends of hers in Somerset named Briscoe. If I understand her rightly, a party was in progress to celebrate the victory of Colonel Briscoe's horse Similar in an important race, and a cork extracted from a bottle of champagne struck her so sharply on the tip of the nose that she lost her balance and fell, injuring her wrist." Then came 3 pages about the weather, the income tax, which he dislikes, and the recent purchases he had made for his collection of old silver, and finally a postscript. "P.S. Your aunt asked me to enclose this newspaper clipping." I couldn't find any newspaper clipping, and I supposed he must have forgotten to enclose it. Then I saw it lying on the floor. I picked it up. It was from the Bridmouth Argus, with which is incorporated the Somerset Farmer and the South Country Intelligencer, the organ, if you remember, whose dramatic critic gave the old ancestor such a rave notice when she sang "Every nice girl loves a sailor in her sailor suit" at the Maiden Eggersford village concert. It ran as follows: "Jubilee Stakes sensation, judge's decision. Yesterday the judges, Major Welch, Admiral Sharp, and Sir Everard Boot, after prolonged consideration, gave their decision in the Jubilee Stakes incident, which has led to so much controversy in Bridmouth-on-Sea sporting circles. The race was awarded to Colonel Briscoe's Simler. Bets will accordingly be settled in accordance with this fiat. Rumour whispers that large sums will change hands." Here I paused, for letter and clipping had given me much food for thought. Naturally, it was with the deepest concern that I pictured the tragic scene of Aunt Dahlia and the champagne cork. Something similar happened to me once during some rout or revelry at the Drones, and I can testify that it calls for all that one has of fortitude. But against this must be set the fact that she had won a substantial chunk of money, and would not be faced with the awful necessity of getting into Uncle Tom's ribs in order to keep the budget balanced. But this aspect of the matter ceased to enchain my interest. What I wanted was to probe the heart of the mystery that had presented itself. Apparently Cook's potato chip had finished first, but had been disqualified. Why? Bumping? That's usually what you get disqualified for. I read on. The facts will of course be fresh in the minds of our readers. Rounding into the straight, Simla and his rival were neck and neck, far ahead of the field, and it was plain that one of the two must be the ultimate winner. Nearing the finish, Simla took the lead and was a full length ahead, when a cat with black and white markings suddenly ran onto the course, causing him to shy and unseat his jockey. It was then discovered that the cat was the property of Mr. Cook, and had actually been brought to the course in his horse's horse box. It was this that decided the judges who, as we say, yesterday awarded the race to Colonel Briscoe's entrant. Sympathy has been expressed for Mr. Cook. Not by me, I hasten to say. I felt it served the old blighter jolly well right. You ought to have known that you can't go about the place for years making a hellhound of yourself without eventually paying the price. Remember what the fellow said about the mills of the gods. I was in philosophical mood as I smoked the after-breakfast cigarette. Jeeves came in to clear away the debris, and I told him the news. Similar one, Jeeves? Indeed, sir. That is most gratifying. And Aunt Dahlia got hit on the tip of the nose with a champagne cork. Sir? At the subsequent celebrations at the Briscoes' home. Ah, yes, sir. A painful experience, but no doubt satisfaction at her financial gains would enable Mrs. Travers to bear it with fortitude. Was the tone of her communication cheerful? The letter wasn't from her, it was from Uncle Tom. He enclosed this. I handed him the clipping, and I could see how deeply it interested him. One of his eyebrows rose at least a 16th of an inch. Dramatic, Jeeves? Exceedingly, sir, but I'm not sure that I altogether agree with the verdict of the judges. You don't? I should have been inclined to regard the episode as an act of God. Well, thank goodness the decision wasn't up to you. The imagination boggles at the thought of how Aunt Dahlia would have reacted if it had gone the other way. One pictures her putting hedgehogs in Major Welsh's bed, and getting 14 days without the option, for pouring buckets of water out of windows on the heads of Admiral Sharp and Sir Everard Boot. I should have got nervous prostration in the first couple of days. And it was difficult enough to avoid nervous prostration in Maiden Eggersford as it was, Jeeves, I said, my philosophical mood now buzzing along all 12 cylinders. Do you ever brood on life? Occasionally, sir, when at leisure. What do you make of it? Pretty odd in spots, don't you think? It might be so described, sir. This business of such and such seeming to be so-and-so, when it really isn't so-and-so at all. You follow me? Not entirely, sir. Well, take a simple instance. At first sight, Maiden Eggersford had all the indications of being a haven of peace. You agree with me? Yes, sir. As calm and quiet as you could wish, with honeysuckle-covered cottages and apple-cheeked villages wherever you looked. Then it tore off its whiskers and revealed itself as an inferno. To obtain calm and quiet, we had to come to New York, and there we got it in full measure. Life saunters along on an even keel, nothing happens. Have we been mugged? No, sir. Or shot by youths? No, sir. No, sir, is right. We are tranquil, and I'll tell you why. There are no aunts here, and in particular we are 3,000 miles away from Mrs. Dahlia Travers of Brinkley Manor, Market Snodsbury, Worcestershire. Don't get me wrong, Jeeves, I love the old flesh and blood. In fact, I revere her. Nobody can say she isn't good company. But her moral code is lax. She cannot distinguish between what is according to Hoyle and what is not according to Hoyle. If she wants to do anything, she doesn't ask herself, would Emily Post approve of this? She goes ahead and does it, as she did in this matter of the cat. Do you know what is the trouble with aunts as a class? No, sir. They are not gentlemen, I said gravely. This concludes the reading of The Catnappers by PG Wodehouse. This book was read by Frederick Davidson.
Koff was undergoing microsurgery without a general anaesthetic. He wanted to make sure he kept what was left of his penis.